When it comes to responding to the question, tell me about yourself, which happens so often on podcasts, it happens at networking events, it happens at when you've been invited to be on a panel at a conference, and maybe even like the beginning of a speech or something. There's all these opportunities, an interview. There's all these opportunities to respond to tell me about yourself or some version of that, right? Like,
Mhm.
tell us more about you. Tell us how you got started. Tell us why you're here today. All of those things are not the audience saying, tell us everything we need to know about you so we can figure out which thing is most relevant and do something with it. It's the audience saying, tell me something that helps me understand what I'm about to listen to or why I should keep listening. And that's
Mhm.
why figuring out your response to tell me about yourself or tell the audience about yourself is so critical. And these are the 5 mistakes we're going to cover. The 5 mistakes we see people making all the time when they go through and introduce themselves. And, you know, to be fair and clear and transparent, somewhere over here, you can figure out how to join us at our brand new workshop called Tell Me About Yourself, the workshop,
Mhm.
which is taking place at the end of June. It's 3 days. It's totally free. There's 45-minute sessions each day with some little homework you could do in between. And the goal of it is to help you figure out your tell me about yourself story or response. There's also a VIP option, so in case you want us to help you with it, you can figure that out too. But you'll find the
Yep.
link here to join us for that. And today, what we're going to talk about here are the 5 mistakes we see people make.
Yes. And I mean, let's be real. We all know our stories, right? We know the facts, we know our timelines, we know what we did, we know where we've been, we know what we're trying to achieve. What I see, and we're going to get into the 5 mistakes, but one of the things I think we both see a lot is that people just don't spend the time to think about what's going to be most effective. And that's what we're here to do is, we think because we know ourselves and because we know our stories and we talk about ourselves probably more than we realize when we get asked that question, right? But taking the time to actually think, well, wait a minute, what is that question really asking? And what is the best way to answer it so that what we talked about in our last live stream, which you can go back and watch, you are relatable, you are memorable, and you know how to put the audience in the center. That's the reason that we spend some time on this. And that's why we hope you'll join us.
And by the way, somebody asked me, and I was like, okay, let me rant about this. The whole idea of putting your audience at the center is not telling one of those fake stories
Right.
around like, where the audience must be the hero. No,
Right.
when we asked you tell us about yourself, we really do want to hear about you. So that whole like thing that people are teaching out there of like your audience is the hero of your story. I don't think
No.
so. They really do want to hear about you, but they want to hear about you in a way that is helpful to them or
Mhm.
helps them realize why they should keep listening, which is the whole goal. If you're going to go on a podcast, if you're going
Yeah.
to um, be on a stage, if you're going to be at a panel, the goal of that introduction is to get them to keep listening to you, to get them to say, "Oh, I better tune in," because that beginning part is when they tune out.
Mhm.
So we definitely don't want to do that. And we talked last time about the people that say like podcast hosts who do that or panel
Yeah.
moderators who say, "So tell me about yourself." I've
Uh-huh.
seen people say, "Oh, they're the worst. They're so lazy." It's the job of the podcast host to figure that out. Sure. Yes.
Right.
And if they're in a deep relationship with their guest, then they should, like on the mic drop moment. I always do that. I always say, "Oh, today I was thinking about this, which is why I reached out to so and so who's an expert on it so they could help us with it." Okay,
Mhm.
fine. But I think it's a gift for us when the host asks us, "Tell me about yourself," because it gives you a chance to say, "Perfect. I can now set this whole interview up the way I want. I can say what I need to say to get the audience to view me how I want them to view me." And so that's why this is so critical, and it's
Mhm.
such a common question.
Mhm. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the mistakes because these are the things that sort of are the default answers. It's where we, when we're not prepared, kind of fall to, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's understandable. So if you do these things, don't shame yourself. We've all done them. Mike and I have done them. We've
No
learned from
shunning.
them. Yeah, no shaming. But the first one, and this is probably one of the most common ones that we hear, which is all of a sudden you go back to sharing a timeline of events that led you to where you are, but just in these factual ways. Well, I did this, and then I did this, and then I learned that, and then I did this, and then I was here, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and now I'm on this show.
Yeah. That was actually, I was listening to my very first interview on Bruce Irving's great show, Smart Marketing Podcast.
Yep.
It was the first interview I remember ever doing. I think I even just had like my little iPhone headphones, you know, with the little microphone right here. I didn't even have any clue. And he asked that question. And I was like, well, I started working in the restaurant industry when I was 15, washing dishes. Somebody came in and gave me an apron, got it. And then I told him about every single job I'd ever had in the industry, which didn't do anything to tell the audience why they should listen, what my perspective was on things, so they could say, oh, that's interesting. I agree. I want to learn more, or I've never thought about it that way. I better stick around. So I was listening back to my very first one, and I did that exact thing that literally ended the way Chloe said, with like, and now I'm here. 27 minutes later, they've learned nothing about my perspective, point of view, the work I was doing with people at all.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's not that none of those events are important, but what's important is finding the one, maybe two, that lead to something that answers that question for the audience, that they go, oh, this is for me. I need to know more about that.
Yeah. This is where we talk about the difference between a biography and a memoir. In a biography, we hear about the day they were born, and here's how they ended up where they were. We are interested in biographies when they're about celebrated people and we want to read about them. Like, if there was an autobiography of Kelly Clarkson, I'd probably read it. Like, I want to know, where was she born? What was it like? What did she do in first grade? But we rarely are interested in memoirs or biographies of people who are not extraordinary or famous. In those cases, what we want is a memoir, which is somebody saying, how can I weave together? And by the way, here's the joy of that. If you're thinking of writing a book, you could write like 27 memoirs, but you can only really write one biography. Because a memoir is about taking a slice and looking at it from a different perspective. So you might say, this is about difficult conversations I've had over glasses of wine. Okay, cool. This is interesting. Now shape that for us. A memoir has perspective. A memoir is about making an argument. And when you're introducing yourself at the top of a show, tell me about yourself, your job is to make an argument, not to be argumentative, but to make an argument for what you're going to present, share, or something, so that it lets us know a little bit about your perspective. We don't need to... I think this happens, Chloe, because we're worried that we need to build credibility. That we need to say, here's all the 27 reasons you should listen to me. But the reality is, we listen to someone because we think, oh, that's interesting. I think I need that information.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. I better hear why they think that is. We were coaching some folks today in the Mic Drop Method, our public speaking coaching program. And we were talking about this exact thing of when you're titling a speech, how to title it so people say, I do want that thing, but I never thought of it that way. I wonder what's inside of this package, right? It's the same way with books or things like that. We want to do that in that intro and not simply tell them, how you came from a zygote to this fully fledged being in front of them.
Yes. And if you're listening and you're thinking about, well, that doesn't have to be that much. I'm not on podcast. This applies to everyday life, everywhere, the people you meet, the people you network, right? When you get home from the end of your day, you might tell your partner or your spouse or your roommate, whomever's there, the biography of your day because you have a relationship with them where they care. They want to know what happened in your day. Whereas the person who you stop on the way home to pick up a cup of coffee to go doesn't want the biography when they ask, how was your day?
Yeah. Well, what's so interesting too is that we give all these people who are listening to a podcast, people that are listening to us on a panel, people at a networking event, by answering the tell me about yourself in the way that we're going to teach next week, it gives them something to remember. So they could say, oh my God, yeah, that's the guy that thought about this. Or, oh, she's the one who went through this thing. You got to meet her. She is so cool.
Yeah.
She told me this thing about how she blah, 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 blah. They're not going to remember all the credentials because
No.
in the course of listening to podcasts, in the course of a network session, in the course of a conference, we're meeting a lot of credentialed, smart people. Okay. So we got to do more to stick in their mind. So sharing a timeline, that is the number one big fumble we see people make.
Yep. And the next one is, it can be, these two can kind of go together, because the next one is when you get down a path and you start sharing all these details that have no like meaning, right? They don't actually matter. They just distract from something. And, you know, you're telling a story that maybe you think is achieving a goal of connecting with the audience, but all of a sudden you're talking about the color shoes you were wearing and the way in which the person next to you looked at them, and it has no bearing on anything, no result of the story, and people are just distracted.
And this is different than what we're going to share in the fumble number 4 in a minute. So you're going to want to stick around for that.
Yep.
This is like where you're inside of a story and you're going off and telling us things that aren't related to the, again, go back to number 1, that central argument you're trying to make, the central way you're trying to get them to see you. So all of these extra details that Chloe's talking about, that happens so often where people are sharing like, oh, I started working in, 1995. I was working at a Pizza Hut in a small town with my grandma. There was also a lady named Lorena who worked there. She was great. She was, she was fabulous. And there was she worked with her sister too. Because the audience is thinking, oh, there's going to be some link between working with your family members later. And when there's not, they're like, well, wait, what was that about? What was that? We need to think a little bit more like an episode of Law and Order, where everything they're telling you is creating a filter in which you're viewing the episode. And that's our job in this too.
Yep. If you aren't able to sort of connect, to connect all of the pieces of what you're saying together in a way that lets the audience easily follow and be like, oh, I see. Oh, yes. You want them agreeing with you the whole way through. If you start talking about stuff and they're like, wait, what? Wait, where are we going? Who is that? What? How is that person actually important? You've lost them.
Yeah. And that's the worst thing to do, because guess what? When you lose someone in that first little bit of a podcast, a panel, they're gone. Hard to get them back. They're moved on.
It reminds me of some people we actually both used to work with. Sometimes we would hear somebody, and in our minds we'd be thinking, get there faster, because they'd be filling in details that I actually think sometimes people feel like are coming from this like great storytelling place, like I'm setting the scene, right?
Right.
But that's a disconnect between understanding what's important and what's just fluff.
Yeah. Well, and it comes down to like what we teach in when we're teaching people the 5 stage languages inside of the mic drop method around like, is this somehow creating an image in the audience's mind, or is it just paraphernalia? Does it matter that the room was brick? We kind of tend to go into like creative writer, like we're getting a master's of fine arts in creative writing in the bad way. Because like there's creative writing that could be done well, but we get it in a bad way where it's like, I could see the blue sky shining outside, and it's like, is that important? Is that critical? Especially when we're introducing ourselves vocally, when we're in a situation where we're doing this on air or on a stage, we've got to keep the train moving. And unless you're going to pull one of those bricks out of the brick wall, and there was a message that told you something important, then nobody cares.
Yep. And that's a key point. Everything you say should be something that matters and that people will care about. Okay, so sharing your lifetime was fumble number 1. Sharing too many details that only distract was fumble number 2. And fumble number 3 is the short answer people who maybe it's 1-word answers or 2-word answers, and they don't actually provide a value anything for the audience or the host. I will say, as a host, when you have somebody like this, it's hard because you are like pulling teeth. Trying to get some answer. But that's like the people who are like, so tell me about yourself. And you're like, well, I got into the industry a few years ago and now I'm here.
Right. Or I'm a public speaking coach.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interview. The person's going to ask you more. Um, and probably if that's what you're there to talk about, the audience knows that about you. The host knows that about you. So how can you frame that and get them to see you differently? Because like when we go on a show,
Yeah.
we know that there's a lot of other public speaking coaches out there. So we want to make sure that from that very first minute, they see that we approach this differently, that there's a different
Yep.
philosophy that we have. And
Mm-hmm.
so we don't go into a 27-year story about it. But if we just said like, oh, we're public speaking coach, someone will be like, oh, I heard one of those yesterday, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Versus what we might say is something around the way we approach it. Well, we, that our approach is around writing, performing, directing to become transformational speakers. And it's like, okay, well, where did that come from? So those
Mm-hmm.
one word answers can really devalue everything you're there to do later.
Mm-hmm. And they put all the pressure on the host to make connections, on the interviewer, on the person asking the questions.
Right.
They will start talking more than you. And as the guest, that's not the point. As they're trying to learn from you or get something from you, you just saying, even if it's a follow-up question and your answer is yeah,
Hmm.
they're going to be sitting there like, okay, let's see, what else do I got?
Right.
And the
And,
audience gets bored, and that's the concern.
and if you've agreed to go on a show or something, it's a perfect opportunity to highlight your thought leadership, what you see in the
Yeah.
world, the transformation you're trying to create, the products you have, all of that. And so learning how to do it in this introduction so that people stick around and say, ooh, I think this is my person is so
Mm-hmm.
critical. And so that's why those one word, short word answers really don't help you.
Yeah. I feel like one of the ways in which you end up in that spot where you're short answering is because of nerves. Like you
Mm.
just get in this place where you don't know what to say, you get nervous, and so you just start thinking of everything as yes or no, or being very quick so that nobody can see that. And that's something we can go over and talk about because it's easier to overcome it when you just do the work to be prepared and understand how, moving into the next one, actually you should always be thinking about the audience because the fumble number 4 that we see is forgetting there is an audience.
Mm-hmm.
And there always is. Right now we have an audience, so we're constantly looking at you and thinking about you and trying to make sure who might be here and what examples are going to be best to share. And that's again going back to the other video, what will make you relatable, memorable, and keeping the audience in the center of the story. So forgetting about them isn't, and what Mike said before, it's not about like making them the hero. That isn't the goal either. Putting the audience in your story just means you understand the pain point that they might have that you can help with, and finding a way to include that and what you've learned and an element that makes them be like, I get this. I need to keep listening because this is for me.
And I think part of it is also about using words, stories, examples,
Mm-hmm.
humanizing it, because we so often show up to these things and we're experts.
Right.
And I'm here to tell you, and I'm here to tell you. And it's one of the things we see so often when we start coaching someone is
Mm-hmm.
their speeches, the scripts they give us will be very like, here's all the things I need to tell you. And what we know from the most transformational things out there, film, television, Broadway, music, songs, it's about creating a specific space, your specific space, that
Mm-hmm.
is also universal for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how can we talk about when you first realized this mattered, when you first cared about this in a way that the audience says, I felt that way recently? Because what we tend to do so often is we go on these shows and we do our little spiel. I
Mm-hmm.
help executives
Yes.
learn I help executives give better speeches through my proprietary, and it's like blah, 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 drone me out
Mm-hmm.
versus I remember sitting and listening to my boss about 5 years ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, this person could save the world, and everyone in the room is tuning them out because it's so boring. And that got me really curious about what it takes to be a transformational speaker on stage. And so since
Mm-hmm.
then, I've studied it, researched it, and I've worked with thousands of speakers to help them take the stage and make a difference. See the
Mm-hmm.
difference there? So Forgetting the audience is about not putting them inside of the story at all because you haven't thought about them, why you're there, what they're thinking about. And in the Tell Me About Yourself workshop, we're going to talk a little bit about how you need to think about that before you go on a show to say, maybe I need to alter my story a little bit. Maybe I need to shine a light in this section versus that section because it's going to be more relevant for this audience. And that's one of the big critical things we think that we see all the time is people not remembering in an intro, in a response to Tell Me About Yourself, or in a whole speech, really, that there is someone on the other side who's trying to see themselves in that content.
And you're not serving yourself, your idea, your work when you don't take the time to think about it in this way.
Right.
And I actually see it a lot. We both have seen it a lot as we've both been, Mike previously, me currently, executive producers of TEDx Cambridge. And it's an amazing event. We bring in, if you go look at the speakers, there's a lot of speakers who are very intelligent, very smart. They're from academia. They do a lot of research. And that means they bring in with them lots of words and lots of phrases of things that most of us, me especially in the beginning, I think we both at the beginning, when we hear them talking, are like, what? Right? And if you talk over their head the whole time, which is kind of what Mike's talking about, you talk over your audience's head as such an expert, you're not connecting with anyone. And it's the most valuable thing when you find the way, the analogy, the experience that you can share that does exactly what Mike said and creates the universal story that everybody goes, I get it. I need to know more. Yeah.
And it allows them to look around and say, oh, I've thought that. Oh, that's happened to me. Oh, that could be someone I know. It gives them a chance to really, see themselves in it so that they stick around and listen.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about this last one then.
Okay.
Because it feels like it goes against what we've been saying because we're talking about being relatable, connecting. But one of the things I think hurts people credibility is the random tidbits. So we get to the end of everything. You're like, and I love blue horses, yellow cats, and strong coffee. If you're a celebrity, because okay, we'll watch the Kelly Clarkson show. We'll watch the Tonight Show, and we'll listen to Scarlett Johansson talk about going to Trader Joe's because we're just like, oh my God, she goes to Trader Joe's like me. Listening to another thought leader on a podcast talk about how they like coffee, it's like, they like coffee? It's not interesting. It's interesting if Scarlett Johansson likes coffee. It's not so interesting if I like coffee. So we do these random tidbits as a chance to connect at the cost of fixing the main introduction so that people say, regardless of whether you like coffee or not, I get what you're about and I'm so there for it. So these random little tidbits of like, I have 2 dogs and I live in the suburbs and, I like my coffee like I like my men in a cup. I don't know what that means.
I don't know. I was like, what? Where did that come from? Yes. And I think that the key part of that is it's not that what you like has no value. It's not that in all of your sharing and all of your social, you can't express the things that you like. It isn't that, but it is not the place when it comes at the cost of the actual thing you're trying to achieve. And that's the key point of that is, I love dogs. Let's talk about that. It's not what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
And it might come up naturally, which is different than you inserting it randomly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even that, if you were on a show that was about loving dogs, that's not that interesting.
Right.
Versus I'd want to hear, did you have a moment, in the 3rd grade, I was stuck in a train track and this sweet dog came over and chewed my shoelaces off so I could be saved. And ever since that day, I said, there's something about this relationship with dogs and I've been obsessed with it since. Like, that's more interesting than I love dogs. So if there is something relevant there, then either find a way to put it in, like Chloe suggested, or if it's the main thing, say it in a way that's actually helpful,
Yeah.
because if you're on a show about loving dogs, saying I love dogs
Mhm.
it's empty air. It's empty
Yeah.
calories.
Yep. So avoid the random things, the yeah, so does everyone else, which is what that would be.
Yeah.
Like, okay, come with something interesting because everybody here does. That's not that interesting. So,
And even like as another example, I was on a show about like a parenting. Somebody had
mm,
me on their show talking about being a dad. And so when they said, tell us more about you, what do we need to know? I thought, well, me just saying that, you know, what I do with the mic drop method, what Chloe and I do here, that's not as relevant for the audience. So
mhm,
I thought, when they said that, I thought, when I became a dad, one of the things that was really interesting to me was how I had to make this decision between, did I want to keep traveling? Did I want to keep being a public speaker? Did I want to be not at home with her? And I had this moment where I realized that a world where people are able to tell their stories, where people have been told that
mhm,
standing on stages and getting on screens and saying what they need to say is what it takes to change the world and heal the world. And I realized that's the world I wanted to live in. And so being a dad actually strengthened my resolve in doing the work that I do as a public speaking coach.
mhm,
That's not the normal story I would use, but it was relevant for that audience.
mhm.
And anyone who was there who was like, oh, that's my guy when I need a public speaking coach, sure, wonderful.
Yep.
Um, but it's about being able to look at the experiences you've had and say, how do I make this connect? And if those random tidbits are important, then let's actually give them weight and meaning and not just
Mhm.
throw away taglines at the end because you don't know what to say.
Yep.
It's like
Can't
the
top that story.
the faux quirkiness.
Yeah. Right.
Like
Yes.
it's like every attractive blonde woman in LA is like, I'm weird. It's like, are you? Because you seem like every other really attractive model actress, but you're trying to brand yourself as like Zoe Deschanel, but the job's
Mhm.
taken. Okay, the job's taken.
Yeah.
Um, so if it's
Which
true, then help us understand why.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I would say, maybe a wrap up of the 5
Yeah.
fumbles that we've gone over here today is you still have to be honest, right? Audiences want the truth. So don't go in making things up because you feel like that's what's going to be impactful. You still have to be truthful and honest, which is different than authentic, and I feel like that's a different show.
Well, and what's really interesting is like a nice little pinpoint to that.
Yeah.
What the audience really wants more than your truth is the truth. Something they
Mhm.
can hold on to and say, that feels real. I better stick around to see what happens next.
Yep. Yes. So come and find the truth that you can share
Nice
with
segue.
us at the end of June here, which is next week, actually. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'll have 45-minute sessions. Tell me about yourself workshop. We are going to help teach you the ways to really craft something, not only for yourself to be able to share every time you're asked, but also how to, you know, use it so that you can ebb it and flow it for the audience. Like Mike just gave in his example to talking to parents versus talking to speakers.
I love it. And you know what the truth of that is, Chloe?
Mm,
It's free.
yeah.
It's free. It's no cost. It's going to be 3 days. Day one, we're going to talk about where to start looking, where to start pulling from, setting some goals for your intros. Day two, we're going to start putting those together, selecting some. And day three, we're going to talk about how to actually construct them, how to actually say them, how to write them so that they feel like dialogue. And once you sign up, you'll see there's a little VIP thing. If you want our help, you want to stick around after the show ends for the after party, then we're going to be helping people live with their actual messages, and you can be part of that too. So grab the free access at the link that you find with this video, and then after that, we'll tell you more about VIP if that's interesting to you. But let's get that story. I want to hear all
Yeah.
these podcasts. I want to see so many examples of people that have gone out there and told me about themselves. We'll see you next week.